Right, people. Peace and greetings. Welcome to the show. We're getting set up. We're about to get started here. I am Brother Boniti, as you guys know that already. Getting everything plugged in. Then we're going to have Dr. Bynum on the phone line shortly. Let me get this going on this side. And we will get it going in a minute, people. Just make sure I got everything up and running. All right. Connected there. We good. Let me just get this going here. And we are good. All right. All right. All right, I think we're good. All right, so we want to welcome everybody to the show. As you know, we have a guest on this evening who's been here a few times before. Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum will be joining us shortly. A lot of you that have been watching the show for a while are familiar with his work. One of his main works out of the many, which I'm going to go through a couple of them. Most people are very familiar with his dark light consciousness, Melanin, Serpent Power, and the Luminous Matrix of Reality book. He's authored many other books. Some of the titles I'm going to run down to you real quick. African Unconscious, Dream Life for Families. Hold on, that's Dr. Bynum there. Greetings, Dr. Bynum. How are you? Hello, Dr. Bynum. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, very clearly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm just doing your brief intro, then I'm going to bring you in a minute. I'm just going down the list of your books right now, and then we're going to bring you in.
Fair enough.
All right.
All right.
You got it. All right. So some of the titles from Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, as I said, most people are very familiar with his book, Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin, Serpent Power, and the Luminous Matrix of Reality. But in addition to that, as I said, he's also authored The African Unconscious, The Dream Life Families, The Roots of Transcendence, Families and the Interpretations of Dreams, The Family Unconscious, Chronicles and the Pig, which he actually got an award for, The Luminous, and the list goes on and on. All Dr. Bynum's books are easily accessible via the internet. Majority of them do come in digital format, hard copy. You can go straight to the publisher websites on some of the books. Amazon, they pull right up. Inner Traditions is another website that carries many of his books. All you have to do is Google. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about, the information, you will be able to have access to that via any of those formats. And as you know, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum is a clinical psychologist, and the books that he writes, he's not just writing it from just personal research. Some of the stuff he's actually have talked about in Dark Light Consciousness, he has traveled to many of these places, so he is teaching from an experience perspective also, which in my opinion is very important. So that's pretty much the brief synopsis. I'm gonna bring him in, just make sure we can hear him. Dr. Bynum, welcome to the show.
Good evening. How you doing?
I am good. I'm just going to check to make sure everybody can hear you good. Can everybody listening hear him? Can you just type in the chat that he's good? Can everybody hear? I want to make sure we have the sound adjusted and everybody's good.
Okay, good.
Okay. So again, we want to welcome you back to the show. We know you've been here, before, and it just never seems like we could probably be on your books, for time, more, because there's so much information in them. So what we usually like to do when you come on, kind of focus in areas of the book, jump around, and I know there'll probably be callers and people that have questions later from some of your other works. But what I wanted to focus on and start out with here this evening out of the Dark Light Consciousness book, there's a couple, well, we never even got into any of this stuff before. Chapter 6. All right, I wanted to kind of go there. There was a few things that stood out. Now, one of the aspects of the book, the serpent power, and you talk about awakening the serpent within. But in chapter 6, which that's eventually where I want to go, but there's some things in chapter 6 which I think are important. If you could you talk about projection, but if you can break down how you're describing projection in chapter 6 from an objective and a subjective perspective. You explain the difference between the two. So if we could start there, the process of projection.
Yeah. So, projection is not only a psychological term, but it's also depending on the situation, a medical term or even a term in physics. All it means essentially is the information that you are seeing or getting doesn't feel like it's coming, at least initially, from right inside of you. I'll give you a simple example. We go to a movie in old-time movie theater, and they had a projectionist behind us shooting the film up on the screen in front of us. Well, the film behind us was projected onto the screen. So that's one form of projection.
Okay.
A medical form of projection would be something that's called referred pain. And that is that a person may feel that a certain part of their body is injured, like a wrist or a finger or some other part of their hand. But actually, the origin of the problem is, say, a pinched nerve.
Okay.
So the pain can be projected from its actual site to some other place in the body and be felt there. So that's kind of like projected. Okay. And then there's psychological projection, where there's something going on inside of you, but you don't want to see it. It's too awful. It's too unpleasant for one reason or another. So you deny it in yourself and you project it out, and you're able to see it in somebody else, but not yourself. Case in point, your regular domestic couple, and they get into an argument every now and then about this or that, and one of them has difficulty seeing selfishness in themselves, but they will project it, and they'll see their partner as being very selfish all the time. Okay? So there's different kinds of projection. Some is physical, some is medical, some is psychological. Okay,
and and I'm glad you explained that. The reason why I had brought it up, as far as our personal development, when we talk about spiritual development and the processes that you explain in the book, how important, especially the part when we deal with a psychological aspect of it, the way you just described, how important is this for our spiritual development and growth? I mean, how critical is this?
Well, I my own personal belief about that is it's extremely important. I mean, you can, anyone who's undergoing a deep spiritual transformation, regardless of the discipline or the religion or the school or whatever, is going through a deep religious experience of one kind or another, and their own interpersonal or intrapsychic, it's called, issues, and we all have issues of one kind or another. They can't see them for one reason or another. They're thought of as bad,
right?
But they will be able to project it or see it in someone else. Now, when it comes to a religious issue, that's particularly difficult because you can have an intense thing going on in yourself. You can't stand it, so you project it onto others, and the others become unbelievers. Okay. The others become demonized. The others become the repository of all of our negative thoughts and images and so on and so forth. They're sort of projected out onto the other. And if you have some spiritual process, some shadow it's called, going on in yourself, but you can't acknowledge it, you can't handle it, you're more likely to ignore it. And then it turns up, you're observing it in somebody else, and it may not be there, or it may be only there a little bit, and you're greatly exaggerating it. But it blocks your spiritual development because you can't get beyond a certain block inside of yourself.
So
that's when it's difficult.
Right. So let me ask you, Dr. Bynum, is there any, in your research and your work, is there any connection to that and what they would call in the occult, dealing with the shadow self or the real self, or acknowledging those parts of yourself, in a sense, that need to be worked on or addressed or fixed?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. It's referred to as the shadow side of our personality. We all have shadow sides to our personality.
That's right.
Some of them are huge shadows, and some of them are relatively small shadows. But to be a human being means to be born into this world and to develop shadows in our psyche. And so we have to confront them and acknowledge them, and we may or may not be able to completely integrate them. Sure. We may or may not be. And it is absolutely critical that you solve every one of your internal problems before you can become an enlightened or intelligent or whatever person. So that's a myth that you have to somehow be spiritually perfect in order to go on beyond a certain point. In fact, that in and of itself is a sign of rigidity.
Correct.
And perfectionism. So a healthy, wholesome approach to the body, to the mind, and the spirit is really your best defense against any of these dark spots, these blind spots, these shadow spots that all human beings are susceptible to.
That's right. Right. Okay. And I'm going to get into some of the stuff. Well, if we move ahead in that same chapter, you also talk about, I believe it's a little later down, classic methods of mind-body separation. Can you kind of elaborate on that, since it's kind of correlated to what we're talking about?
Yeah, when we were talking about mind-body separation, what I was trying to do was to show that, since our days out on the savannas and in the forests and in the mountains, we've had this capacity to separate mind from body and carry on our spiritual work. Right. And most of the time it's something that we naturally do, but not something that we find easy to do. Let me be more specific. It's you can all right. This is a little bit technical, but
that's okay.
Here's an example of that. If a person is projecting,
right,
and you're able to see those parts of yourself relatively well, you will have various dreams about it. You'll have waking state understandings about it, and so on and so forth.
Right.
However, if you wanted to develop a physical discipline where you projected yourself out of the physical body for whatever reasons, you need to be aware of what your tendencies are, because you're more likely to encounter them when you do leave your physical body. It's much like a dream. If you have lots of blind spots in your personality, things you can't accept or acknowledge, that are pretty monumental, then you're going to be projecting them a lot, and you're going to be having dreams about them. You're going to be having nightmares about them.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so it's one thing to have a dream or a nightmare about these things. It's another thing to project yourself out into the, let's call it the spiritual netherworld. And then you're going to encounter those things that you are projecting out. And that can be highly unpleasant. Okay.
Now that's kind of, I'm glad you explained that. Now in some circles, they'll refer to some of those things in the category of astral projection. And what you're describing when you say you're projecting those things, you make contact And I've always said this to people: you make contact, and when you say some of those things aren't pleasant, can you elaborate? Are we talking about some of those things, the things that we project from our mind, the thoughts that we've created, or all these things that we're connected to? Is this kind of what we're talking about, or are we alluding to something else?
Yeah, just like there are levels and strata of people that you meet with all kinds of motivations,
right?
One kind or another. It's also true in the psychic world, where we project out all kinds of things and then we encounter them. Here's another very concrete example. In a lot of our communities, particularly African American communities in the States, in the Caribbean, and in South America, in addition to the continent, we have a number of different religious disciplines that are very, very powerful. Okay.
Right.
Well, if a person is not psychologically ready or prepared, then when you make a journey out of the body, it's called an out-of-body experience, technically, you can oftentimes encounter those kinds of levels of experience, and they can be most unpleasant.
Correct.
So that's why you want to study with others, you want to read, you want to do your homework, you want to do your inner work, and you want to be as prepared as you can, because it can be very powerful.
Right.
And just because a person experiences something intensely and is psychically charged, so to speak, does not necessarily mean it's completely a harmless or positive experience.
Correct.
And so we need to be mindful of that. And I say that to all of those of us who have an interest in some of the indigenous African religions that have come here to the States through our ancestors and through our history, be it Voodoo, be it Santiara, be it various variations on a theme across the states. That these are all very extremely deep and powerful disciplines, and so we need to approach them with reverence and respect,
correct,
and awe, but also an open-mindedness. And when the teacher says something that doesn't make sense, the Baba says something that doesn't make sense, we need to be able to ask them what this is about. And if they can't give you an explanation, or if they just sort of like lay something on you about, you just have to trust me on all of these kinds of things, it's time to be wary.
Correct.
It's okay to be a person of faith, but that doesn't mean that you therefore cannot use reason at all.
Correct. But having said what you just said about a lot of those spiritual systems, and I know in the past, or previous shows scattered about, we talked about, because that's one of your areas, obviously, of specialty, the mind, and being in a sound mind, sound body. But what would be your advice to somebody? What you just said, something critical. And in my travels and talking to people, even being initiated in IFA and things of that nature, there are a lot of people that do get, unfortunately, scammed, or they don't get the correct information, or like you just pointed out, if there's something you don't understand and you question it and you get that type of response, what would be your advice to people, that do explore, those paths as far as getting ready? I mean, what would you suggest that they do? Because there's some people that don't really know where to begin as far as seeking out, what would be your advice on that?
My first advice is to make sure that you don't study this in detail totally by yourself. That you also have some sort of community. It doesn't have to be a huge community, but some other kind of community where people can sort of talk about not only their beliefs but also their actual experiences.
Right.
And you also want to have experiences and disciplines that you can sort of do and sort of test out, you know, and to see if indeed such and such is the truth, you know.
Correct.
Yeah, it's okay to ask, and it's okay to be very empirically minded about it.
Mm-hmm.
We in the diaspora have a deep, rich lineage of disciplines that involve truly powerful rhythmic incantation and trance-inducing phenomena.
Correct.
And it's much deeper than hypnosis.
Right.
And it has a powerful spiritual psychic agitation, for lack of a better word, that can come along with that. And it's been involved in our history for a long period of time. But these also have the capacity to affect the physical body, let alone our politics. Mm-hmm. We've known this for a long time, although it's sort of scattered and we've been made afraid of it. And we've been made afraid of it, or at least cautious of it, for good reasons. I mean, it's very evocative, very powerful. You know that the Haitian Revolution mm-hmm. began in a Rada, in a voodoo rite.
Correct.
And it just swelled up, and it swept across the whole island.
Right. That's right.
So for good reason, the French were terrified of it, and for good reason, the white Americans in the South, particularly in Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, were terrified of their chattel slaves getting to know each other, talking about the religion. Beating drums sometimes was illegal.
Correct.
Playing the drums was illegal. Reading was illegal for good reason.
Correct.
Because people would find out about it, and then some of these techniques and methods have the capacity to bring up things in the psyche that are really powerful and were certainly terrifying to the slave masters.
Big time.
I mean, sometimes you'd have 5 white people on a plantation and 100 black people. Mm-hmm. Well, they were terrified right. that mm-hmm. at any time they could be an uprising. And by the way, there were hundreds, not a few dozen. There were hundreds of slave revolts, some large, mostly Correct. Small. Correct. But there were all through the South. So when we go to the movies and we see Gone with the Wind and the pictures of the happy darkies singing on the plantation and so on and so forth, that happened to some extent. But there was also a lot of poisonings that was going on.
Sure.
A lot of murders that went on. A lot of runaways, sometimes slaves who were docile for, years and years and years. Just one day had enough.
Correct.
Just had enough, and that was it. And you just started killing folks.
That's right.
So we still have that going on in our politics today. I mean, one of the terrors in this country is the idea of an inner city revolt, right?
Big time.
That's big time. That's why you get cops shooting up black people, particularly males, a lot and getting away with it and being subtly endorsed by the country and the community for doing that because they want to make sure that they maintain the upper hand.
Correct.
It all falls apart if a number of people begin to fight back physically.
Well, speaking of that, Dr. Bynum.
Then you have the riots.
Right.
And that terrifies America. Big
time. Speaking on that, because obviously, we're living in a completely different day and time. I know, me personally, I'm sure obviously you see this in your field. There's some people that this really has a serious psychological effect on them. It affects them. It instills fear in them. And you said something just a minute ago. We know some of this is done, like you said, to keep the upper hand, to keep control. But really, the person, I've run into people where they feel like it's so fragile at the moment and it could crack at any time. How, to somebody that thinks like that, feels like that, I mean, how do you keep that person's mind focused together? Because Bottom line is somebody can get trapped in those fears. They can get submerged into that, you know, those things that they feed our emotions via media, movies, TV. I mean, you know this. How does one kind of keep themselves focused? But I mean, we have to be aware of it, but there are some people that I find get swallowed up by it, and they kind of get knocked off their path, and they're just not right no more. In your experience, in these trying times, what's the best way to deal with those things from a mental perspective?
Well, from a mental and emotional perspective, I would first suggest gently that if you're feeling really unstable and very loose, that it's probably not the best time in your life to get very involved in an intense spiritual discipline.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
That's not the time to do it.
Okay.
You need to feel pretty stable, steady. Your body needs to be basically healthy, and you need to have your relationships generally in order. Otherwise you're more easily destabilized. And when you're destabilized, the rise of the energy through your meridians in your body, if you want to think about the meridians, channels, pathways, however you want to think about it, is not smooth. It's very erratic, and that's when you are very vulnerable, and that's when you can have a break.
Correct.
There are many people, in my view, used to be in the state hospitals. Now we have strong chemical prisons, so that you just take those chemicals and you're in prison. Who are actually persons who've had their spiritual energies stimulated or awakened by one series of causes and reasons or another, don't have a teacher, do not have a community, don't know how to recognize the signs and the symptoms of an awakened energy path, and therefore they demonize it. And so, we have to, the best thing we can do in situations like that for some people, as sad as it may be, is to suppress it.
Correct.
But remember back in the middle and earlier part of the last century, what was often America's response to any new creative movement in Black music, be it jazz, be it later rock and roll, be it earlier ragtime, be it much later rap music. It's always, quote, the devil's music, unquote.
Right.
Well, part of that is a fear of what gets stimulated when you have a deep, primordial, rhythmic process happening. Right. And if you look at our fundamentalist churches or some of the smaller religious groups, there's a lot of dancing where there's movement of the feet, stamping of the feet on the floor,
correct,
flexing of the hip,
correct,
the lower hip, and the rhythmic time with breathing often. And this is a technique. This is a technique for awakening the serpent energies, correct, in the human body. Correct. And our traditions are extremely rich in this. Correct. But they're often mislabeled.
Correct. And I'm glad you bring that up about the music, because when I look back, recollect growing up, they also followed it up, like when you bring up the fear factor of one of the many aspects of the awakening. But when I go back and I look at it, whether it was the 60s and 70s, when you had a lot of conscious R&B, you had, Marvin Gaye, the OJs, Teddy Pendergrass. I mean, all these artists, the way that it was conveyed, it was an energy and a certain message they were putting out there. But then they followed it up with Superfly stuff, pimp stuff. They always find a way to downplay it. And then same thing I noticed happened, with hip hop in the early 80s, going into the 90s. I always looked at it as a gift from the elders to kind of speed up our intellect and our creativity. But then, they demonized that and everything became about gangster rap. And yeah. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That seems to be the dynamic that gets played out here in the Americas, in the United States, I should say. Not everywhere.
Right.
It didn't happen that way in Cuba.
Correct.
It didn't happen that way in large parts of South America and the Caribbean. But it happened that way here in the U.S. today. Mm-hmm. Yes, it did.
Yes.
And it probably will again. So, I mean, but what I hope folks can hear from this, what we're talking about now, is that there's a powerful genie. There is a methodology. There is a biologically rooted stimulation of the spiritual process.
Right.
And that in the African diaspora, there are many of these disciplines that are there.
Correct.
And it spreads not only from West Africa to the Caribbean and the States and South America, but also in the other direction, it spreads from Africa over to India, particularly southern India. Our Dravidian cousins in southern India have many of the same traditions in terms of music that we do in Africa.
Correct.
And they are explicit about it being used to stimulate varying areas of the body so that there are resonances that get kicked off. And when those resonances get in sequence with each other, then we have entrainment.
Correct.
And that can very often be a beginning of spiritual awakening, because if you can entrain certain parts of your body in combination with your heartbeat and your breathing, you can get that coordinated with other kinds of energies, particularly electromagnetic energies that are bounced between the Earth and the ionosphere at a 7.5 hertz cycle. But you get entrainment with that, and you go into profound, deep trance. And that is the work that I hope that we begin to do more in the middle and latter part of this current century. That is going to be one of our great gifts.
Correct. Now, I'm glad you bring the music thing up. I want to, before I get into what I had here, but how important, well, I've always had this discussion over the years, the difference between natural instruments. I know you mentioned the drums earlier, actual, authentic music via, being created naturally. When we were just talking about some of the music now, as we know, everything is computerized now. And when you were just breaking down how that affects us, and you were breaking down the different scientific explanations of those rhythms and how it can affect us spiritually, how in your research, because a lot of this computerized music, I've done research and read they can actually connect it to the biorhythms of the heart. They can actually capture certain sounds that kind of tap into our emotions, because if we look at the music, you see how some of these young kids, even when we were younger, I can even reflect, the music can definitely alter your mood state. It can, you can all of a sudden be in a very calm state, and then obviously get in a very aggressive state if you're listening to some type of aggressive music. But what I'm trying to bring out, how damaging is some of those computerized music that's put out and produced, that we've exposed ourselves to so many years? What kind of effect can that have on us spiritually?
Well, I have to say that I honestly don't know. I haven't really explored it. I don't listen to it that much.
Right.
So I have to say, I'm in this area, I'm fairly uneducated.
Okay.
I mean, I lean toward certain kinds of music.
Correct.
And it tends to be more direct, and that's just my background and my taste.
Gotcha.
I don't have a lot of sophistication with electronic music. I mean, I like, obviously, acoustic guitars,
right,
and so on and so forth. But some of the other stuff, I'm not as familiar with.
Okay. Well, the only reason why I had brought it up, because like you mentioned, the acoustic guitar, there's the difference I've found, as opposed to authentic instruments, as opposed to these computerized sounds they're capturing. And again, this is just my opinion. I'm not putting any, claiming that it's a tell-all fact, because I've watched, for an example, some young brothers sit down who are into music, mainly maybe more modern day stuff, hip hop and things of that nature, but they can't play the drums. What I've seen is like some of this has disconnected people's natural rhythm or connection to the universe, because I've literally watched young men sit down and try to play the drums like if they were playing, a hip hop beat or something. So I was only bringing it up in the sense I've noticed, maybe it's just my observation, but I've noticed that it seems to some, not all, kind of disconnect their natural connection to the order of things, is kind of what I was, alluding to.
Well, it feels right that person can say let themselves get disconnected, but it's not a permanent condition.
Correct.
It's not a permanent condition, and it's probably easily reversed unless you do damage to your eardrum and the hairs in your ears and that sort of thing. But it's probably relatively easily reversible. And when it is reversed, or you do come back to the primordial rhythm, so to speak,
correct,
which is connected to the heartbeat,
correct,
it feels like you're getting back home.
That is exactly right.
You there?
Yeah. We're here.
Okay. Yeah. So I would just suggest that you play it safe, play it natural, and listen to the classics.
There you go. There you go. All right. So what I wanted it's a short chapter, but there's two things you talk about in there that to me are very important. You talked a little bit about part of it a little while ago. But I want to talk about the quiet inner attunement that you mentioned. This is real important, and I stress this a lot to people because this is where you really, in my opinion, link in. And then I want to talk about the dangers and delusions of this path, which I think some people are not aware of. But first, if you could talk about the importance of this quiet inner attunement that you mentioned in chapter 7, I think it's really important. One of the most important things.
Well, one of the things that is a pet issue for me that bothers me a lot actually, is that there's this notion that spirituality is somehow free in the sense that you don't have to do anything.
Right.
All you have to do is believe.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with certainly believing. And there's nothing wrong with only believing. But I think that keeps us in a poor man's position.
Correct.
I think that and believe that a spirituality that is explored physically and emotionally is a lot more powerful. Here's an example. I know that there are a number of different teachers and communities where there is a lot in our cities and communities where there is a lot of intense discipleship, so to speak, of the charismatic leader, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But very often that leader and those associated with him do a lot of ceremonial stuff, which is fine.
Right.
But they don't do a lot of stuff that's transformational in terms of the physical body or the one's intimate consciousness.
Correct. That's correct.
And so they'll erect an altar in their home, which is wonderful. They will pay homage to the spirits of the altar and the spirits of the family. That's great. But the leaders don't tell them how to describe to them how to commune directly with those spirits. They don't tell them how to get into a certain physical posture, how to control their breathing, how to focus their mind, how to go into a sleep state, how to enter into a trance state. And I think that that's important to do. I think that is getting beyond the front door of spirituality and getting into the nitty gritty of it. Now, for me, that happens to be the path of a certain kind of yoga helps tremendously for me because it helps ground me. I can carry out certain kinds of experiments, if you want to call them that, just so you can verify that indeed this stuff is really happening.
Correct.
And that I can compare that with other people's experiences, so that I know, so that it's empirical, it is a science, and you can pass it on, as opposed to only going with the ceremonial aspect of it. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the ceremonial aspect of it. So please do hear that. I'm just putting in a plug to follow that up with a physical manifestation of the practice, whatever that might be.
Right.
And I mean beyond sacrifice. I mean, what are you doing with your mind when you're making that sacrifice? Mm. What are you concentrating on? Are you concentrating and focusing on any place in the physical body? Mm. When you enter into a trance state, or you enter into a dream state, are you trying to do any particular kind of thing? That is what I'm pushing for. That's all.
I got you. Good stuff, though. Now, this is very important. I know in the past, not this particular section, we've kind of gotten into areas of this. You touched slightly on it earlier, but I know you mentioned earlier, which the next chapter gets into some of the, chapter 9 gets into the disciplines, but prior to that, we'll get into the serpent stuff prior. But you've mentioned before some of the dangers, and, not to scare people, but dangers and delusions, things we should be conscious and aware of. You mentioned health a little bit earlier, being in a good mind, good body. Can you, in your experience, your research, your travels, and plus the systems you've been initiated in, what information would you pass to the people as far as what you were conveying in this section here, the dangers and delusions of the path that we need to really be aware and conscious of?
Well, I was focusing on a few specific things, and one of the dangers at sometimes is believe it or not, is overconfidence. The assumption that you experience a state of calmness, and you mistake a state of calmness for full awakening, or you do a few techniques and procedures, or you stumble onto something that stimulates energies moving through the body, which are quite real and quite physical, by the way.
Right.
But you mistake that for the actual deeper primordial energy that's moving. It's a little technical, but when you do certain kinds of, yoga practices, you can get a certain kind of energy stimulated along your spine, and let's face it, that's what yoga is about. It's about moving the energy along the spine. It's not about getting into strange esoteric positions and that sort of thing. That's okay, but the main thing is that you move the energy along the spine. Well, sometimes that energy gets stimulated, and it feels really good, you see. Mm-hmm. And people can get kind of high on it, and because they're kind of like stimulated by it, kind of get a little stoned on it, they think that is the Kundalini, that is the Uraeus Serpent, and it's not. When the Uraeus Serpent wakes up, you know it. There's nothing subtle about it.
That's right.
It sometimes begins subtly, yes, but it always builds and builds and builds, and it's different from what's called technically primal prana, or the beginnings of the energy stimulations in the body, and that is different than the powerful awakening of the Rudam Serpent, the Uraeus Serpent, the Kundalini Serpent, which is a metaphorical expression of that. It's not an actual snake in your body. It's not. Correct. Don't go there. But its feeling and its behavior is much like that. It undulates at times, it moves around at times, and so on and so forth. And so it takes some discipline to direct that, and that's where the work comes in. Correct. So it's not enough to get it stimulated. You can go to a powerful preacher on a Saturday or Sunday, and they're going on and on about whatever they're going on and on about, and it's very powerful. There's a call and response from the church audience and choir, and people are shouting about and everything else. It's really intense. Mm-hmm. And that kind of briefly raises the energy. And then church is over and the energy goes back down.
That's just basically...
People have not learned how to raise the energy and keep her up there.
Mm-hmm. And
that's the point.
Right. You've even talked about in the past, as you were just describing, moving around, like you said, and I think with some people, it's not always pleasant either when that Kundalini energy is, raising or as you're figuring out how to work with it or some of the experiences with it. Because I think some people get that a little bit confused with what you're talking about. Like they'll tap into it maybe on some aspects, get it stimulated, but I found that the growth process with it, as you figure it out via the work, not all of it is pleasant. And I remember you talking about that on one of the previous times you were here.
Yes. And sometimes it's physically not pleasant. I had an experience a few times in the early days of this where the energy certainly was stimulated, but instead of moving up, she moved down. And that was very unpleasant. So I had to, make sure I kept my posture and everything else so that the energy is directed upward. That's really, really, really important. And that there are channels and locks that flow through the body, just like there are in any other energy conduit, that you have to learn. And so there's a discipline about it. And whether you're doing a Kundalini yoga, whether you're doing a Buddha practice, whether you do whatever it is, learn the disciplines of the school that you're following. Share your experiences with others in a public format, i.e., where this is what we're doing, and compare notes with other people. Read. It's okay to read and do research to keep your mind open, and make sure that you're relatively physically healthy and that you're psychologically basically sound. Because, a lot of stuff gets stimulated, man. And, you just have to be basically healthy. You don't have to be a saint.
Correct. So when we get into chapter 8 now, and I'm glad you touched on that, because that's in my opinion, common sense usually is one of the best methods to applying things, because people can go to the extreme or lack thereof. And yeah, you've talked about that in chapter 8, and I don't expect you to, because this could be a whole class in itself. You, in the very beginning, you talk about, can you give the people this whole Kundalini concept that's very popular in many different systems of spirituality, in different circles. In your research, you give a thorough, good breakdown, but can you give a brief history before I get to some of the other sections in this chapter, the origin of this and how it's been passed down through so many years of time to the point where, we're still fascinated by it today and we still utilize it today. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we know for sure that human beings, we know for absolute sure that human beings have known about this in a very clear way, at least 5,000 years before Christ. We know that. Mm-hmm. We have all kinds of architectural and archaeological data from all over the earth to indicate that human beings, regardless of where they are on the planet, if they've been large enough in groups, have sort of discovered this. Okay. Mm-hmm. And those who sort of like codified it, in other words, studied it and made it more of a discipline and a science, were the peoples in Africa and India, particularly southern India, the Dravidians of southern India, the dark-skinned folks of southern India, who are now make up the untouchable class, of course. Mm-hmm. And many peoples in Africa, South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and certainly the northern parts and southern parts of Egypt, in Nubia, and Sudan. Right. So that's where it was richest. And undoubtedly, there are areas that we have not uncovered yet, or we don't know as much about in the interior of Africa, because too much is radiates in all the directions from there to indicate that obviously much of it comes through there too. When it was first discovered, your guess is as good as mine. Oh. I don't know. All we know is we know for sure at least 5,000 years before Christ. Right. And then then people got really serious about it. There's a lot of indications that our species has known about this, not only at the end of the last century, the last cycle of civilization, but probably in the cycles before civilization. You know, where our current cycle of civilization goes from about 4,000 BC, 4,000 years before Christ, until the present time. But there is ample evidence that there was another cycle of civilization, particularly with its remnants in Egypt and Nubia and southern India
Correct.
in the Vedic era, about 10,500 BC. That's when probably many of the pyramids were actually built, not 2,500 BC during the so-called, quote, pyramid age, unquote, but probably around 10,500 BC, the same time the Sphinx is. The Sphinx has water erosion marks on it. They indicate that it was built in a lush area. The Sahara hasn't been lush like that since about 8,000 years ago.
That's correct.
8,000 BC, I should say. And the Sphinx, which is Horus in the horizon, Horus in the horizon, is looking directly up into the constellation of Leo the Lion of the body, Leo the Lion, in 10,500 BC. Okay? Not 2,500 BC. On the vernal equinox. So that's an indication that that's been there for a long time, that there was a cycle of civilization during the last part of the last ice age when it stopped. And there was a damage, and it got wiped out. We don't know why, but at the end of the last ice age, about 10,000 years, 9,000 years, around in there before Christ, there was a deluge, a flood, and it wiped out a lot of that. And we went back into the darkness.
Right.
And then it took us 6,000 years to climb back out of that. Why that happened? There are a lot of speculations about it, but we know something like that happened. Something like that happened. That's right. And the African peoples were at the very center of that stuff.
Big time.
They're at the very center of that stuff. And that's buried in your deep psyche. All you listening right out there, I want you to know that. That has not disappeared. That is buried in your deep collective unconscious. It is there.
That's right.
You have access to it. So don't be frightened away from it, and don't be buying a lot of propaganda about it. Be empirical, keep your mind open, and explore it, and you'll find that it is actually there. It is in your physical body.
Big time. Yep. Okay, before I continue, just to let listeners know, so how we're going to do the questions this evening. I see it's great. You guys got a bunch typed in already. I'll go through the chat. If you want to come in live and ask Dr. Bynum a question, because I'm using this phone line because of getting interference with the previous one. If you want to come in when we get to the question portion, I will send you the link. You will come in live, ask the question. When you are done, leave the room so we don't have any background noise, so we can get the next person that wants to ask a question live. So when we get to that portion, that's what we will do. Again, I'll send you the link if you decide you want to come in live and speak to Dr. Bynum. But once you are finished, go ahead and remove yourself, and we'll take the next person. And we'll obviously go through the chat. So the next section I want to get into, before we do that, Dr. Bynum, in chapter 8, I want to stay in chapter 8, and you talk about, it's somewhere, I believe, in the middle, the psychological dynamics of meditation or meditation practices. I believe this is very important, and I believe meditation is one of those doorways or keys to a lot of the things that you're talking about this evening. In your research, and why you can elaborate kind of what inspired you to put this in the book. How important is meditation in your research and experience?
Well, for me, it's really, really, really important. And let me say immediately that there are different kinds of of meditation.
Correct.
There's a quieting or hyper quieting method of meditation, which is something that I tend to do, but is by no means the only way. But it consists of quieting your body, literally quieting your body, so that as your body gets quiet, your mind can get quiet. It's easier to quiet your body down than it is to quiet your mind down.
That's right.
Your mind is a slippery creature.
That's right.
She's very slippery. Okay, so you can't. It's extremely difficult to just tell yourself to quiet down. So it's easier. It's just simply easier to quiet your body down first in the quieting method, and then like catching a butterfly. If you go after a butterfly and you're lunging at it here or there, the butterfly will fly all around you and you're not going to get close to the butterfly. But if you see the butterfly and you move extremely slowly toward the butterfly, to where you can move your fingers very quietly around until eventually catch her by the wings. Then you've got the butterfly.
That's right.
Okay?
Right.
Well, that's analogous to the quieting, hyper quieting methodology. And that is a way to capture the mind. And it's a whole series of disciplines. It's called concentrative absorption. All that is a certain kind of pathway toward it. It is possible, however, to go in the diametrically opposite direction, the hyper-arousal. That's what happens when folks, say, get involved in intense rhythmic dancing and movement. They can go into trance state. That happens a lot in certain Wudang practices or other practices more associated with, say, West Africa or South Africa. In the Kung people of South Africa, they will stay up much of the night in their ceremonies, doing a lot of dancing, repetitive dancing, moving the feet, the lower part of the body, chanting over and over and over and over to build up the energy in the body. And that is more of a hyper-arousal state.
Right.
When that hyper-arousal, in the midst of that, it's very quiet in the center of that. So you have two different ways, two different techniques or disciplines or methodologies, but they will get you to the same place because that will awaken the energy also. So you need to hear loud and clear that there's no one way. The human beings have devised many different ways, and that the critical thing is to find out what works with your body, what works with your mind, what works with your intuition, so that you can sort of tailor to that. So you can find out what's going to work best for you. Mm. It's like anything else. It's like food. You don't eat any food. Certain foods go better with your body than others, right?
Correct.
It's the same with meditation and the same with spiritual practices. Mm. And just because somebody likes this particular meal and it goes well with their body and so on and so forth, doesn't mean that a different meal won't go exactly the same way in terms of comfort and health and so forth with your body. And it may be two different kinds of meals.
Correct.
So just stay open to it, recognize we're diverse creatures, and that part of our genius has been to develop these many different pathways.
Correct. Okay. Good point. Now, and I'm glad you broke that down. In the fourth section, the luminous work, and in chapter 9, and I would like to briefly go through, I believe you titled the chapter Ethics, Energy, and the Bodily Disciplines, but I want to focus first on health and breath control. I know you also talk about breath control in there. I know over the years, back then, even myself back then and others, a lot of us don't breathe right, or we don't have proper breath control down. So can you kind of elaborate on those disciplines of health and breath and the breath control?
Yeah, well, a simple way to think about it is this. And it's always good to find a simple way to think about things, and then you become more complex later. A simple way of thinking about it is that breath is energy. Mm. I mean, the first thing you got to do, the very first thing you got to do we climb out of or are pushed out of our mother's womb is we got to breathe. Okay?
That's right.
Our heart is already beating. We don't need to be fed. We don't need to speak. But we better start breathing fast. So the nurse practitioners, delivery people, whoever, they get us out of the womb. They usually, if we're not screaming and making ourselves known right away, they'll hold us upside down, slap our butt.
That's right.
And get us breathing. We've got to breathe. And you've got to start doing it right away. You don't have an hour to start. Okay?
That's right.
So breathing is the first thing we do. And then we are breathing when we are awake and when we are sleeping. We're breathing when we're thinking and when we're not thinking. And we go through our whole lives breathing roughly 24,000 times, in a cycle, a day. And then if we're fortunate and we live to a very, very ripe old age, hopefully accumulating a lot of wisdom and a lot of development, what's the last thing we do? We're on our deathbed.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
We exhale and let the spirit go. So in between is a series of breaths. So think about breath as our most immediate energy exchange with the environment. We can go a couple of weeks without eating. We're not comfortable, but we can do it. We can even go 3-ish days without water, and that's not comfortable either. But sometimes a person might be in that situation. We got 3 minutes without air, and it's over. It's getting close to over.
Correct.
So it's our most immediate energy, literally energy exchange with the environment. The air is outside and around you. You inhale. It's now part of your body and your brain. It passes the blood-brain barrier. It is in your brain. Okay?
Yep.
And it's the beginning of all panic. All of our panic disorders begin with breath disorder. So breathing is that. So if it's energy, then why not take a disciplined approach to using that energy? It's not that we're necessarily breathing badly or poorly. It's a matter of breathing more at times efficiently, especially when you want to do a certain kind of thing. A long-distance runner is mindful of their breathing. Somebody who does body work is mindful of their breathing. Someone who does meditation is mindful of their breathing. And a woman going into delivery room about having a child, she's mindful of her breathing. Okay, so it's just thinking about it as energy exchange, and therefore I want to be very scientific and disciplined about my breathing so that I can get the most out of my process. If you think about it that way, then there come to be certain kind of formulas for breathing called pranayama, harnessing the breath so that you can affect your metabolic functions. And you can.
Right.
You can affect your brain, you can affect your heart, you can affect a lot of things by the way that you breathe, holding the breath in the body, holding the breath out of the body, and so forth. And I have the whole chapter, obviously, we're not going to get into now about that.
Right.
But it's very intimately connected to that. And it's just a way of being more efficient and using that energy much better, the oxygen and the prana or other energy in the air and in the body, and it's being used more efficiently.
Correct. All right, good. Appreciate it. All right, so what we're going to do, Dr. Bynum, got a gang of questions for you in the chat. Again, if you want to come in live, ask a question, just type in, I'll send you the link. But again, you come in, you ask your question. When your question is answered, go ahead and leave, and we'll bring the next person that wants to come in live. So what I'm going to do for the time being, I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to go through a list of these questions, and I'm just going to throw them at you. All right, so let me get my place here. All right. Scrolling up because I don't want to make sure I miss anybody. All right, so first question that was typed in earlier from Love Lift Light. In chapter 6, he wants to know, can you elaborate more on the flowing eye in chapter 6?
Hold on. The floating eye?
Flowing eye. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it either, to be honest with you. Hold on.
I have to find out what phrase I use that context in.
Well, what I'll do is love, lift, life. If you got a page that we could reference Dr. Bynum, maybe we can point him to it, and we could go back to that.
Because I don't know if they mean flowing eye, E-Y-E, or the
I, like self.
Subjective self.
Yeah, like the self, I. The I.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. The flowing eye. Yeah. Okay. If you sit for a minute or lay down for a minute, wherever you are right now, and you just keep your body still, and then you turn your attention to yourself, to the I, to the I, the me, the myself, the I, you'll notice that it's not like it's a rock. It's not like it's a solid thing, but it's more like it's moving. And it's more like a candle flame. It's kind of flickering, moving back and forth in one direction. Ideas and images and sensations come into it, and then they pass out of it.
Right. And
it's constantly undulating. So that's what I meant by the flowing I, the flowing me. You should, it's helpful to remember that you're always in the position of energy when it comes to the body. In other words, you're sitting there or laying there, and there are your feet in front of you or down below you. You've got your hands, your stomach, your knees, your head. All of your physical self can be very static.
Right.
Okay? But your I, your me, your myself, is constantly kind of flowing in kind of an energetic sort of way. So you're always in the position of energy in relationship to the rest of your physical body. And then when you fall asleep at night, your physical body all but disappears. But the flowing I remains. And you carry it with you through your dream state. You carry it with you through your nightmares. You're carrying it with you through the states where you're not really totally dreaming and you're not really awake. You're just sort of like drifting around, there, and no particular place to go, Chuck Berry song, no particular place to go. You're just floating like you're moving. And that is a flowing I.
Correct.
And the whole point of the meditative process is to steady that I, not make it rigid, but to steady it and then focus it so that you can do certain kind of work with it. Another way to think of it is that I is very, very, very closely associated with your intuition of what light is.
Yep.
It's very closely associated with whatever your deepest intuition of what light is. And when you take regular light in a room, a 60-watt bulb that illuminates a room, a 100-watt bulb that illuminates a room, and you take the same amount of that energy of that 100-watt bulb and you concentrate that through a narrow frequency beam, it becomes a laser. And then it's capable of doing a different kind of work. Right. So that's a crude analogy to meditation in the mind. You're taking the light of the mind and you're focusing it very intensely and narrowly so that it becomes a laser. And then it's capable of a different kind of work altogether.
Correct. Okay. Well, hope that answered the question. Again, if you want to come in live, just type in the chat. I'll send you the link. I'm going to go to the next question. It's from Wacky J. He says, question for Dr. Bynum. Do you have any suggestions for harmonizing the left and right hemispheres of the brain? That's from Jeremy.
Yeah. Yes, a very concrete one. For those of you in the audience that may not be familiar with it, we have obviously most of us have two nostrils in the nose, And what's interesting about that is that the air through the nostrils of the nose go back and forth, back and forth. In other words, if it in an hour you lean up against a mirror or a window pane and you exhale close to it through the nose, you notice one side of the nostril is exhaling more air than the other one. And then in 45 minutes, it's reversed. Assuming you don't have a deviated septum in your nose or something like that. It goes back and forth in about an hour and a half cycle. And it's connected to the two hemispheres of the brain. And so the hemispheres of the brain are constantly oscillating back and forth, as are the two nostrils. Okay? Well, if you want to balance those off to make your mind more one-pointed, and also some other effects associated with that, there's a technique called alternate nostril breathing. Sounds complicated, but it's not. So you breathe out of one nostril at a time. And it's not difficult. It's not difficult. You simply sit in a comfortable position, you quiet the room down, and so on and so forth. You sit in a comfortable position and you just breathe normally through back and forth through the nose. And after a couple of minutes of that, you take perhaps your dominant hand, bring it up to one nostril, close it, and inhale and exhale through the opposite nostril. Do that 3 or 4 times, and then reverse it 3 or 4 times. You'll find that one nostril will be more open or closed than the other one. But if you keep doing it for about 5 minutes, they'll even out. And then when you finish it, after 5 minutes of doing that, evening out, focus your attention at the top of your lip and the bottom of your nose, right where the two nostrils meet. And focus on the exhalation phase of the breathing cycle. And you'll find that you profoundly quiet the body. You'll begin to quiet down your mind quite a bit. And you'll notice that you have the capacity to slow down your heart rate considerably. So it's not difficult to do. It's not difficult to do. I believe somewhere in Dark Light Consciousness, I described that in some detail. But more the neurological, et cetera, that goes along with it. But needless to say, it's an old yoga technique, alternate nostril breathing. And it's very, very helpful in achieving a state of quiescence. It's as good as a Valium. It really is. And there's no side effects. And once you practice it enough times that you get it down, it's something that you miss when you don't do it.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that. All right. The next question is from Oni. She asked, how do you prevent picking up other people's emotional energy during cowrie divination and Ifa when you see Odus pass numbers 1, 2? I don't know if you understand the question dealing with cowrie divination with the Odus and Ifa.
I think that if I may be wrong in this, but I think that the person is asking about how to protect essentially your energy field, your auric field, if you want to, from any negative influences. And one of the safest ways is an old classical formula, and that is of doing the diaphragmatic breathing before you begin the ceremony and by yourself. Do the diaphragmatic breathing for a good 5-8 minutes or so. Then do a little rapid breathing a little bit for another couple of minutes. Then inhale fully, raise your arm all the way up to the top of your head, and then exhale, bringing your arms down. And sort of visualize creating an elliptical or an egg-shaped shell around you. And meditate on keeping yourself protected, steadied. Ask for benevolent protection, benevolent forces to be with you, kindness and forgiveness and compassion for other people and yourself. And that is really the best way to sort of kind of protect yourself, really.
Okay, cool.
And it's an easy thing to do. And that method has been around for thousands of years, folks. There's nothing new under the sun.
Right. Okay. So, Oni, hopefully that answers your question. All right. Let's go to the next question. Dynasty. Hopefully I'm not messing the name up. Dynasty Macaro. just, I don't know if it's a statement or more just your thought on it. How about seeing images through dreams? I'm not sure exactly.
Say that again.
I don't know if it's more of a statement or a comment. I guess the process of seeing images through dreams. I'm not really understanding the question. Maybe they could put something a little more in. But
yeah,
maybe,
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't want to
Right, me neither. I'll be honest with you, I don't. So I'm going to suggest Dynasty. Maybe you could be a little bit more clear. If that was just a comment, or maybe we're not understanding, or maybe it was typed in wrong. So I'll look for something further. All right. What else we got? Where is it? Hold on, scrolling down. Okay. This is from Mandela Born. Do injuries like scoliosis affect the rising of the Kundalini? Can that affect it, is his question.
Well, that's an open question. I've asked that myself, and I haven't been able to get a straight answer from that. It would seem to me that it would, but it's also the case that a lot of people have been able to reach a spiritual height without necessarily using that method. Let me say it a different way. If you have scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine, usually in the upper spine, but not always,
Right.
Because the spine is usually the gentle S-shaped structure. But if you have scoliosis, you probably don't want to do some form of Kundalini yoga. You probably would want to do a different spiritual practice, and it can be any form of. There can be many other forms of meditation. Okay, Kundalini yoga just happens to be one that works particularly well with a basically standard issue spine. So if that presents itself as a problem to you for whatever reason, look into other meditative practices, mindfulness practice. There are other dance practices, so on and so forth. And there are also forms of meditation that don't necessarily involve directly stimulating the Kundalini. Okay?
Right.
So that's probably what I would suggest, simply because with the Uraeus, the Kundalini, it requires a relatively intact, traditional, normative spinal line to work best. That's all. So if there's a roadblock there, you simply take another road.
Okay. All right, good question, though. So let me come down here. I'll come back to that. All right, so this is from Relic Sirius. Is spontaneous combustion related to Kundalini? Because sometimes it felt like it was gonna go out with a bang. I guess they're describing their personal experience. Is there any connection? We've all heard about spontaneous combustion. Your thoughts on that, Dr. Bynum?
My thoughts on that are purely merely my thoughts. I've read about and heard stories of people who, during a certain kind of spiritual practice, really heat up to the point of making their body and blood really unstable. But again, I've only sort of read about that and about spontaneous combustion. Right. There is a practice, however, in the practice by many Tibetans, where as a demonstration of their proficiency in the technique, they have to learn to generate intense bodily heat, enough bodily heat such that they can dry wet towels on their backs. Okay, it's called tumo.
Right.
Yes, it's called tumo, and they generate enough heat through the discipline to dry the towels on their back. And this again is done as a particular manifestation of their proficiency in this particular technique. But that's not spontaneous combustion. That's the generation of intense heat in the body.
Okay. All right, appreciate that. All right, let's go to the next question. Let me scroll down, find it. Okay. All right, so this is, all right, I think I skipped one here. Hold on, let me go back up. All right, so Matthew Watson types in, what are some breathing techniques to increase your awareness as far as dream states or dreams?
Well, it's not so much a technique as it is a suggestion, but although there are some technique aspects about it. Prior to going to sleep at night, you might spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes in standard meditating. And then that's to quiet your body and quiet your mind so that you can be reflective as you go into the sleep state and being mindful that you are. And then as you are falling asleep, as you're laying in bed, falling asleep, saying to yourself gently, not critically, but gently over and over, tonight I will remember my dreams. Tonight I'll remember my dreams. Okay? Another method is just take a non-critical look at the content of your dreams and see if there are any things in particular in your dreams that tend to repeat themselves. And most of us, we have things that repeat themselves. Some people will have, dogs, animals that appear in their dream. Or someone will often be doing some work with their hands in a dream, or somebody's driving a car in a dream, or whatever it is. Whatever that seems to repeat as a motif in your dreams. Learn what that is, whatever that is, and then let's say every time you, if say airplanes appear in your dream, then every time you see an airplane when you're awake, you ask yourself, am I dreaming? Just ask yourself reflexively, am I dreaming? 95% of the time, the answer would be no. But 5% of the time, you will be. And then that'll be, you will immediately recognize, oh my God, I'm dreaming. And you'll become lucid. You become conscious in your dream state. It's called lucid dreaming. And it's a very interesting condition because all of a sudden you're aware that you are dreaming, but you're not awake. And it's very peculiar. It's like being inside of a movie. And you can begin to kind of sort of change things around in the movie, which is a very cool thing to do. It's interesting exploration psychically and psychologically and so on and so forth. But the deeper discipline beyond that, however, after you get over the interesting aspect that you can sort of kind of direct your dreams like in a movie, is then to begin to use your dream state for spiritual exploration. And you may encounter powerful figures in your dreams that you can have dialogues with that are extremely intimate and can be helpful to you. In ancient Kemet, and then later in Greece and Rome, they did this in their famous sleep temples. Well, this is where it came from. And you can get teachings of one kind or another that are intense, very, very, very intimate, and coming from your deepest self, and the God that lives in your innermost self, the God of your own Ori, God of your heart, the God of your soul. And once you've done this, nobody can take that away from you because you know what you know.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Bynum. You talk about the dream. How much of this, well, I know to an extent it is, but in your opinion, because of what you just said, the statement you made, nobody can really tell you because you know. How much of this journey and experience is subjective as opposed to objective?
Well, most of it is going to be subjective when it first occurs to you,
right.
which is why I've indicated that I think it's a really, really useful practice to share your ideas with others through writing, through social media, through communities that you're with, through other study groups, so that you get them back and forth. So it's not all inside of your head, you know. I mean, part of my writing of these books is to explicate my own experience and to put it within a wider context,
right,
so that people can sort of see it and see how that gels with their experience, see how that gels with things that they've read about and heard about, and so on and so forth. So it becomes empirical, so that it becomes something that is testable.
right.
And that's how you get out of being purely subjective to something that is you share with somebody else. And once you're being able to share with someone else, then it moves from being purely subjective to one that is more shared. I wouldn't say objective, because objective applies to objects in the world, and you're not an object.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. So this is a question from, and again, if you guys have questions, we got over 50 people in the chat. Type your questions in. If you want to come in live, just type on the bottom. I'll send you the link. You can come in live and talk to Dr. Bynum while we still have him here for a little bit. So get your questions in, people. All right. This is from Matthew Watson, more of a personal question. He's asking myself and you. Well, I'll ask you first. Do you have a particular pantheon? He's asking a deity that you enjoy working with more than others, or a certain system. Asking you that.
Actually, it's more of the question for me is the system.
Right.
And the system that I work with, that's comfortable, that's been useful for me, is a system of Kundalini yoga that comes out of Kemet and Dravidian India. And the systems are extremely close, and those are the ones that I'm most at home with and most comfortable, that I've learned the most from. I've learned other, things from other disciplines, that's for sure. And but in terms of physical groundedness and being able to carry out experiments and to test things, hypotheses out, and to sort of know, it's been the best for me. And I mean, to be totally honest with you, I'm betting my life on this. So
okay,
I'm betting my life on this. So yeah, this works for me, but I realize that I'm talking about me, and other people will find something that's more adaptable to them, and I encourage them to do it. All I want you to do is to find something that works, that you can test out, and that it's not totally in your own head.
Correct. And that's a good point. And I think, good question by Matthew. It is personal. Same thing for me. I think system, I tend to lean towards, Egyptian alchemy, Heka, some of the Egyptian mysteries. I just find that I connect more with that, along with many other things. But I agree. It's certain systems. It used to be Ifa years ago. Not that I still don't, get a lot out of that, but I just kind of felt, in that direction more so with Egyptian Heka and dealing with alchemy and mysticism, things of that nature. All right, so let's go to our next question. Hold on, jumped on me. Let me just come up. I want to make sure I don't skip and miss anything. If by chance, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Before you ask that next one.
Go ahead. Yep.
Dr. Bynum was talking about different yoga practices. Because I haven't done I have tried vinyasa, but I haven't experienced all yoga practices. So will all yoga practices assist you in, well, I know it assists you in quiet in the mind and the body, it'll get you in a certain state. But does it also will assist with opening your channels for for that energy to flow, the Kundalini energy to flow?
Would you, Brother Mike, would you summarize that question because the voice is coming in and out?
Okay.
Oh,
Can you repeat
can
it?
you hear me okay?
Can you hear it now, Dr. Bynum?
A little bit better. Just so, what was the basic question? I'm going to make sure I try to understand.
Well, the basic question is, does all yoga practices assist in raising Kundalini energy?
The point of yoga is to raise that energy. Some do it more directly, some do it more indirectly. Some spend a lot of time at a different phase, or I should say rung of the ladder of yoga. But all of them are intended to do that simply because of the structure of yoga. But in the modern age, i.e. these days, we spend more time in the different yoga school, yoga studios, and people are spending an enormous amount of time and energy on the various asanas of yoga, to where there are literally hundreds of these. And people will spend time trying to get their body to be in a particular yoga posture, which can be extremely helpful for your health, stimulating your endocrine system, your digestive system, and so on and so forth. But all of those dozens and dozens and dozens of yoga asanas, postures are actually relatively new. Most of those developed in the latter part of the 19th century, when a lot of the British, with the new camera, they went to India. And some folks on the street would get into these various postures for the camera, and they would pay them. And so a lot of postures came out of that. But if you look at the ancient yoga text, most of them have about 10 postures. That's it. There aren't like dozens and dozens and dozens of postures. About 10. So we spend a lot of time on the asana rung in the country, in the US of A, these days. But there are other rungs of the ladder. There are the rung of the ladder involving breath control, pranayama. And then there's also asana. But those are all the middle to the lower rungs of yoga. The upper levels of yoga are not physical. In other words, if you're successful or moderately successful at the early stages of yoga, i.e. observing the things that you should be doing behaviorally, ethically, and everywhere else in your life, the code of ethics, and you're doing that moderately well, and then you do the asanas. Basically, you find some asanas that work for your body without stressing it too much, and you learn enough breath control. Those are all the lower 4 rungs of the classical Raja Hatha yoga system. Now the upper levels of it are different. They're not physical at all. All those good postures and breathing are all to get you prepared. They're like the detergent, so to speak, to clear the fabric. After you've done those, then you begin the next level, which is concentration. And concentration is really trying to keep your mind in a general orbiting area so it doesn't wander all over the universe. So he's trying to keep it kind of like quieted. Okay? After you're moderately successful at that, and there's no clear line from one to the other, you begin to be what's called contemplation. And contemplation is where you are thinking about finding the meaning of, exploring the dynamics of keeping your mind in one place about one particular object or subject. And you look at it from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different positions, but you're associating, intensifying, identifying your mind with that. Then the next level after that is what's called pranayama, where there's gradually not much difference between you what you are thinking or contemplating or meditating on, and the process of meditation itself. The three kind of get fused with each other. Meditation, what you're meditating about, and the process of meditation itself, samyama. They kind of weave together and fuse together. And then that inexorably leads into the next stage, which is referred to as samadhi or nirvana or nirvikilpa samadhi. There are different levels and depending on your school and orientation and so forth. But that's where you move beyond your individual self and you begin to submerge your individual self with the larger self of which you are a subset. And that's a different state of consciousness. So you see the first four levels of yoga are the physical ones, the ethical ones, the ones with breath control. The upper rungs are of concentration, contemplation, samyama, and then samadhi, or the superconscious state. Does that make sense? You there?
Raven, does that make sense? Did we lose you?
Yes, I was coughing. Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Hope I didn't lose her.
No.
No, thank you. Thank you. I was coughing. I didn't want to be rude. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have any other questions?
No, go ahead.
All right, so let's go to the next question. This is from Osiris Soot 888. The question is, what are methods that we can use to fix past regressions and how to convert the negative energy to positive energy?
Well, you're talking about clearing your own, you're talking about clearing your own unconscious, clearing your own aura. And I would begin with, again, what we've been talking about before, a simple quieting procedures of your physical body. And then after that, move to quieting your mental body. And that can take a long period of time. So be patient and kind and generous with yourself. But after doing that, you might do well by spending some time in meditation asking for forgiveness. I know.
Yeah.
Asking to be forgiven for your shortcomings to yourself. Renouncing the shortcomings that you fostered onto others when you've been not so kind to them. And asking for forgiveness for when some people have given you a hard time. In other words, letting go of a lot of extra baggage. That is the best way to do it. It quiets the mind down, quiets the body down, and you recognize others as fellow travelers on the path.
Correct.
They may be enemies at one particular time, but we've all traded places with each other. Mm-hmm. We've all done stuff to each other, and that's part of our learning here. This is part of what embodiment, at least from my understanding, is about. Is we change roles. We experience other people. We learn to have compassion for others who are like us and others who are different from us, and even people we don't particularly like. To break through and see them as also a fellow traveler on the path. That's a big breakthrough. That's getting through that projection thing we started earlier on the program tonight talking about. So these are important disciplines, and they're not physical disciplines. They're emotional and spiritual and mental disciplines. Again, you don't have to be a saint. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to be honest and earnest with yourself, and approach this as if your life depends on it, because it does. But think about it this way. Be very selfish. Think about it this way. Right now, you're in your body, and you're in your acquainted mind. And so you know where this is and where that is, and this is and who that is, and so on and so forth. At some point, this is going to end, and your physical body is going to drop off, but you're still going to be here. You're still gonna be you, and all your stuff that usually is easily structured, you can get away with because it's contained in your body or something else. You're gonna be like dreaming out loud. So it's good to be on good terms with what you know your mind dreams about, because at some point you're going to be out there. Okay, so that's another reason. That's another reason to be kind and compassionate to others to the extent that you can, to ask for forgiveness for yourself and for others, and to recognize that even that person isn't being a real ass to you. Is also a fellow traveler on the path, confused, angry, pissed off, irritated with you, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
So they are like you. They are a traveler on this road, and it's a long road, and we've all been traveling on it for thousands of years, all of us.
Yep.
In different guises, in different bodies, in different historical eras, but we're the same soul.
Okay. All right. Mandela Bourne asked Dr. Bynum, have you ever heard of a light in the head that starts like a dot till it fills the head, followed by a loud bang? If so, does this have anything to do with the Kundalini?
I would have to know more about that. There's yes, there is a black dot in the brain. There was a great psychiatrist who passed a few years ago named Richard D. King. And he wrote a very famous book called The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry.
Yep.
Again, Richard D. King, K-I-N-G, he was a physician psychiatrist. The book is The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. And he talks about that black dot. And it's the local ceruleus in the brain, coming up from the brain stem and going up into the lower levels of the limbic system in the brain.
Right.
And it consists of a series of concentrated dots along the brain stem. In our book, Why Darkness Matters, we go into that in some detail, and also in Dark Light Consciousness.
Correct.
Forget exactly where right now, but talking about the structure of the brainstem, I talk about that black dot.
I think it's
Now,
actually it's page.
When Kundalini comes up, she comes up along that pathway because she's a physical energy, and she is a luminous energy and a physical energy, and she stimulates each one of those.
It's chapter 3, by the way, Dr. Bynum, in your book.
Say what?
It's chapter 3 in your book.
It's chapter 3 in Dark Light Consciousness.
Yep.
Right. Okay. But yes, so there is that black dot, and I would have to know more about it, but when you talk about an explosion, I'm not exactly sure what they mean. It can become increasingly intense and luminous, and it can certainly fill the whole head with luminosity. And this is what happens very often with people in different spiritual traditions in which that energy awakens, be it Kundalini energy, the path of Kundalini, or it can be other pathways. But it is a physical template of neuromelanin, which absorbs light and conducts luminosity, literally through the physical body and the brainstem and higher reaches of the brain. So that's what that black dot is referring to. And again, the best book I know about it is my friend Richard D. King's book, The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry, where he goes into great detail about black dot and going into the deep unconscious with black dot.
Correct. All right. All right. The next question is from John. What is the difference between dark light and dark matter?
Oh, okay. Dark matter is essentially that which fills probably 93% of the universe that we know of. It is an energy that is dark, and by dark means that we don't see its actual physical light. with our electromagnetic instruments. We can detect it. We can see it indirectly. Gravity is affected by it. All of the stars in the galaxy, in the universes that we are aware of currently, are often surrounded by this dark matter. Nobody knows for sure exactly what dark matter is. We only know that it is, and it appears to be some 93-ish% of the known matter in the universe. Now, dark light is the light that the radiation in the universe backdrop that we don't see. So it's dark, so we don't see it, but it is a form of light. When you go out and you look outside, your eyes pick up, I forget what the range is, but somewhere a range of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's visible light. But there is light above that radiation wavelength, and there's light below that wavelength that you don't see because our eyes, the retinas of our eyes, simply don't pick it up.
Right.
But it is there. It's the same with sound. We can go out and we hear this and that because it reaches our audio apparatus in a certain frequency, but there are sounds, ultrasounds, higher than that, and frequencies of sound below that we don't hear, okay? So there are sounds that we don't hear, and there's light that we don't see, okay?
Right.
So dark light is the light of the cosmos that we don't see.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right. The next question is from Butterflies and Sunshine. I only hear about intense heat in alchemy. Have you ever heard of intense cold running through the body in transformation, Kundalini, or awakening? And if so, what is it called to further research it?
I don't know about intense cold that's positive. I do know that if the Kundalini comes up the wrong channel, you can be either overly hot or overly cold.
Yep.
In other words, if you look at the medical caduceus, which is a symbol, by the way, of Kundalini, you have a pole, and then the pole is crossed by two serpents, and it crosses 7 times. Okay, those 7 places where it crosses are the autonomic nervous system plexes, energy, nervous plexes in the body. Okay, and they correlate. Underline the word correlate with energy centers, or what's called chakras in the body. Okay, well, technically, if the Kundalini or the Uraeus serpent is directed to go where she ideally should go, she would go up the central pole, not one of those serpents on the side. If the energy moves in one of those serpents on the side, one can be either too hot or too cold. Idala and Pingala, they're referred to in the Dravidian yoga system. The Kemetic Egyptians had other words for it. I'm blanking on it right now, but they recognize the same phenomena. So it's not ice cold. It can make the body rather cool, or the other one can make it rather hot. So that again is the purpose of the alternate nostril breathing and the focus of the attention at the top of the lip, the bottom of the nose. So she comes up through that central channel. Very, very important. That central channel in the spine has many sort of circles within it, okay? And they're called nadis, or pathways, or channels. And you want to just purely technique, you want to bring the energy up the central canal, the Sushumna nadi it's called. And you want to bring her up to the central channel, and you want to bring her up balanced, slowly, using your respiration and those three internal locks that we haven't talked about in the body, but those are sort of like, to use a hydraulic model, those sort of like help the energy not rush up too fast. Because if it rushes up too fast, that can be destabilizing. It can be destabilizing, and you don't want that.
Okay.
You want it to be measured, and you want to be slow going, and you want to be able to carry out experiments so that you can see, oh, if I do this, that happens. If I do that, this happens. So that you can be aware of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. This helps you in your own process, and it also helps you be able to be helpful to others.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Hopefully that answered your question. All right. What else we have here? Let me scroll down. All right. This is from Papa Ken. Are there any mantras one can recite while doing Kundalini yoga?
There are many, and I suggest that if you don't find one by your reading or your listening that feels really good to you, then you say you find something that's very intimate and reassuring and simple, and you use that to repeat to yourself over and over and over again. A simple case in point. You may not be able to remember to say Om Namah Shivaya or Sat Nam, or there are many other very good mantras. So the simplest thing is to say something that's in your own language that you hear that will be useful. Light of my path, keep me safe. Or light of my path, lead my way on. Whatever it might be that you can say gently, simply, over and over and over and over and over. The point of the mantra, one of the points of the mantra is that you can begin to say it automatically after a while.
Correct.
So that's the point of the mantra. So making up your own can be useful if you don't have access to or don't find one that in particular is helpful to you.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. I've got a live question for you, Brother Duma. You're on live with Dr. Bynum. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my question was, I wanted to get Dr. Bynum's thoughts on schizophrenia, and is that does he perceive that as a disease or malady, or does he perceive it as some, like this article I've read on shaman saying that it's actually connected to tapping into the spiritual realm?
Well, from where I sit, certainly some conditions that involve a thought disorder, and again, schizophrenia, for those of you who may not know it, is a kind of psychiatric, psychological thought disorder where your thinking process is affected by your medical or neurological or emotional condition. So where you're not seeing things the way the overwhelming majority of people may see them, and it causes you distress. And sometimes it can involve visualization and auditory stimuli and so on. It can also be unsettling. So the different forms of schizophrenia. The most common ones are what's called either paranoid schizophrenia, where the person retreats into themselves, has what's called ideas of reference, and can have many auditory and visual experiences that are unpleasant. Sometimes, in some situations, that schizophrenia is a reaction to an awakening energy in the body, and that the mind doesn't know what on earth to do about, and it becomes terrified. If a person were to have this Kundalini experience, awakening, and had no idea what it was, no references whatsoever, but felt the effects of it, they would feel something coming in, an alien presence, entity coming into their body, moving up their back and moving up their spine, and sort of like entering into their mind. Well, that's a pretty scary idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have symptoms of what's called schizophrenia. Okay. Sometimes that happens with some of these spiritual practices. And that's why I say, again, that it's best to do it in a community so that you can have your experiences shared with others. You can find out, well, this is something that other people experience. And sometimes when nobody else has experienced anything like this is pretty weird. And so you just get some feedback so you can be more informed about what's going on. And then you can begin to read about it more and consult with other people. And you're much less likely to go off into the swamps by yourself and get lost, simply put.
All right.
Okay. Is it generally hereditary? Like, can it be passed down through a family line, or just a freak anomaly that happens in a genetic line?
No. Unfortunately, there are enough family studies to show that tendencies towards schizophrenia are often inherited. It doesn't mean that because my uncle or my brother is schizophrenic that I'm going to be schizophrenic. No, it does absolutely not. In fact, most of the time it does not. Okay? But there is a tendency, there is an association, there is a higher correlation with it. And some of that is probably, no doubt, genetic. And some of it comes out of the same learning environment that someone who experiences schizophrenia and you live in that same environment, you fortunately may not develop it, but you can kind of see where it might come from because you might have some tendencies like that yourself, but you're not as susceptible, fortunately, as someone else might be to it. There are some very good treatments, by the way, for schizophrenia. Yeah, and some of them involve some forms of psychotherapy. Some of them involve certain well-known medications, and some of them involve changes of life process. But it is by no means a hopeless situation. And best thing you do if you suspect yourself or others of having symptoms like this is to get a consult from your family physician or some psychologist or something like that, just to sort of check it out,
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions, Doom?
That's it. I mean, I was just asking because I had a family member who passed away who had it. That's why I just always wondered that. But yeah, that was it.
Yeah, most family members will not have it, and it's not unusual to have a family member with a mental or a mental disorder. I mean, it's not always other people's family. Sometimes it's our own, and it's not that unusual. And again, just because a family member develops it, by no means indicates that you are going to develop it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Bynum. Thank you.
I appreciate the question, Duma. All right, so the next question we got for you, Dr. Bynum. Can you, this is from John, can you treat or even cure any neurological diseases through the use of yoga? Any connection to that in your research?
Neurological diseases through yoga, none that I'm aware of. There are tendencies that you can use yoga to suppress, but not necessarily a neurological disease per se. When you say neurological disease, I assume you mean a dementia of one kind or another, or an organic process or something like this. Yoga is not going to cure it. What yoga can often do is make it much more palatable and less intense.
Correct.
Okay, and you want to make sure that you are using yoga in a helpful way when doing something like that. yoga certainly is helpful if you have a condition that, say, is made worse with stress. Some seizure disorders are made worse by stress. Some emotional disorders are made much worse by stress. And so by using yoga to bring down your stress level quite a bit, you can affect those other symptoms quite a bit in a positive way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I've never read anything where medically it can, like you're saying, but it definitely could ease the intensity of it. I can definitely see that. Yeah. All right, we got another live question for you. We got Brother Jack here. Brother Jack, you are on with Dr. Bynum. Go ahead, brother.
Good evening, Dr. Bynum. How are you doing tonight?
Good evening. Good. Okay. You too, I hope.
I'm doing well. So I want to say thank you for coming out tonight. With your blessings with your presence. I read your books, and you have a vast amount of knowledge, man. You're on a whole nother level. So I just want to say thank you for presenting the information in a concise way that I can understand it. I'm not a PhD level, but like you, but you break down information in a way that's easy for me to comprehend, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you getting and reading it, because I wrote that book trying to balance off real, in-depth information and also presenting it in a way that's not so esoteric that it can't be read. Because what good is it if it can't be read? So I had to sort of balance those two off. And so I struggled with that to make sure I didn't shortchange the information. Because there's some information in there in reference to African peoples that you don't find anywhere else. And I wanted to make sure I brought that information forward, but also to bring out the medical part of it, but also to make it accessible to folks, so that it's real. It's something that you taste and eat and can live with, and makes a difference in people's lives.
All right, I appreciate that. That's awesome. My question is to you is from all the amount of travel you've done, all the many different spiritual practices or systems you studied and learned from, which one to you felt like, from your experience, from your travels, brought you the most enlightenment? You felt like you gained the most transformation from?
Well, for me, the core of these has been, in terms of the physical discipline, has been, for no doubt about it, has been, a modest but continuous practice of physical yoga. And to do it, I do it every day unless I'm physically ill and can't. And mercifully, that's been very rare. But I do it every day, whether I'm excited about it or bored with it, I get up and do it. That's what it means to be a disciple, to discipline. Disciple, that's where the word comes from.
Uh-huh.
And to stay with it. But the yoga is again part of a mental, physical discipline. And there is no reason, and there hasn't been for me, not to also study the disciplines of the West African disciplines in particular that I find so engaging, Ifa and Budan and the related disciplines, because in all of them I've found there is a core of the Uraeus Serpent, the Kundalini process going on. And particularly in Budan, there are certain practices that involve the awakening of the primal serpent in the body and leading her up through the spinal line, where various internal visions and other experiences in dream states and otherwise are made manifest. A similar phenomena in some of the South African practices that have to do with a whole different religious orientation, but underneath the religious orientation is still the same physical discipline. And that's there because we are all the same physically as creatures, as beings on this planet. And so our physiognomy is the same. So one of us may take a path of Ifa, another one take a path of Zen, another take a path of some other. That's great. That's, fine. Underneath that, however, we have the same spinal line, the same energy, the same structures in our brain, and that's why certain kinds of disciplines are helpful no matter what. To say it simplistically, whether it's a Jaguar or a Ford or a Rolls Royce or a Chevrolet, it has 4 wheels and a steering wheel, and it drives the car.
Makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And one more thing is tied to that, because the root word what I got out of that was discipline, right? When I look at those in Asia that practice the Buddhist monks that practice Kung Fu, they're this the mind and body connection, but they're able to achieve this mind-blowing feat as far as bending knives and bending swords and steel, certain things like that. So looking at that and then tying that into everyday practice, right? Once a person do obtain that pinnacle of discipline, right? Kind of like bending your atoms, right? Controlling your reality, or controlling your reality. You think that's what the connection ties in, is more that discipline, like kind of that repetitive and strengthening that discipline. And once you're able to do that, you're able to kind of control your reality. Because I look at what the Kung Fu masters are able to do, and I'm like, all right, what's the difference? It's the same thing. What's the difference from what I'm doing? So what's your thoughts on that? That's my last question.
Well, I think if I understood you, you're asking about the different tech methods and skills and capacities that emerge with the different practices. And it's certainly true that some societies, some cultures have developed skills and practices that other societies haven't gone in that direction. And particularly in the martial arts of Asia, they developed all kinds of skills by learning how to work with the key energy. And other societies haven't worked that much with the key energy. They've worked with other things, the Kundalini energy, in a different kind of way. In West Africa, they've worked, developed many disciplines for out-of-body experiences or communication with ancestors through dream states and others. So, depending on where you are on the planet, at different times we've evolved different capacities. And it's sort of like, I don't know if one is necessarily any better than another. It's like adapting to the conditions of societies that we're in, and sort of going in ourselves and in our societies and developing whatever seems to emerge. So, we all hopefully can learn from each other. Say it that way.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, Jack.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Jack. All right, so the next question we got for you, Dr. Bynum, is how essential are hand mudras when meditating, and what is your favorite or most used hand mudra?
The hand mudras, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a particular a holding of the hand, usually associated with the different branches of Hatha yoga. And what it does is sort of it's believed to be a conduit of energy, particularly prana energy in the body. And there are number of different hand mudras. The ones where the forefinger and the thumb touch with each other are the favorite of mine. It's called Gyan Mudra. But there are others, and you've got to find the ones that work for you. Some people don't do the hand mudras at all, okay? But coming out of Hatha Yoga in particular, there are a lot of different hand movements. If you see a statue of, say, the Buddha in meditation, you'll notice his hands are in certain mudras, okay? And depending on what particular country the statue is in and what particular lineage of the Buddha that you're talking about, the Buddha will have a different hand gesture. The Yoni Mudra, but it's not exactly with your hands so much. But the most famous one with the hands is Gyan Mudra, for me anyway.
Okay. All right, appreciate it. All right, let me scroll down. There's a question from Oni. During some of my meditations, I just see a snowy screen and nothing else. Does this have any significance?
I can't say. I would have to know more about what practice you're doing and everything else like that to be able to give you any kind of intelligent answer. I must say, I can't say.
I got you.
I simply don't know.
Gotcha. No problem. All right. The next question is from Divine Relationship Alchemy. What is the best thing to do to integrate the shadow self when it comes up in your dreams?
Well, I would suggest that the shadows comes up enough in your dreams that you begin to write it down. You begin to write it down. And if you can write it down in a notebook, after a while you'll find that you'll begin to notice that the shadow comes at certain times in your dream life, tends to occur at certain times in your life when certain crises or events are going on. And that way you get a sense of what this shadow is. And then you can confront the shadow when you're awake. Because the shadow is a representation of what's going on in your waking life. What kinds of situations or people that you avoid or engage with? What kinds of stories you're telling yourself? What kinds of recurrent patterns of life that you're getting into that are not helping you? So the shadow will eventually become conscious in your mind during your waking state, and then you can do something about it there.
Okay. All right, I think we got one or two more, and then I think we will be finished, Dr. Bynum. I know we're a few minutes past the time, then we'll let you go. I know I won't keep you here too late. This one here is from John. What is the functionality of the gray matter of the brain, and what connections to the pineal gland, if so?
The gray matter of the brain is actually referred to as neuromelanin.
Right.
And it is a dark substance of the brain that is associated with our cognitive and conscious processes the most. Of all the mammals, of all the creatures on the earth, the ones with the highest amount of gray matter on the brain, i.e. the surface of the brain and certain critical areas within the brain, are the mammals. And of all the mammals, the ones that have the highest amount are the great apes. And of the great apes, the ones who have the most are the chimpanzees. And the only one with more of this gray matter in their brain surface and internal is human beings. So there's a direct relationship between the increasing amount of gray matter in the brain and evolutionary development, at least on our planet. So that's that connection. Mm-hmm. What that gray matter does is that even though the sun doesn't get to it, it provides dark coloring on the surface of the skin. And that's because it's neuromelanin. It translates light, literally light, into other forms of energy, or energy vibration, I should say. And that's why it's so important. And we have chemical agents in the pineal gland that get stimulated with varying degrees of activity in the brain. The pineal gland literally floats in a kind of a sea of brain fluid. And when this brain fluid is made to vibrate at different times in an orderly way, it makes the pineal gland also vibrate. If you can get the pineal gland to vibrate in a certain kind of way, in a steady kind of way, the pineal gland, just like the sexual organs and the turbinates in the nose, gets stimulated and becomes erect. Yes, it does. So there's a relationship between those. And the pineal gland secretes DMT, which is a very powerful chemical that's highly associated with visionary experiences of one kind or another. And the pineal gland is also intimately connected with melatonin, which not only affects the color of our skin to some extent, but affects our moods. So it's a very, I know this is a short answer to a very complex question.
Sure.
And also different groups of people on the earth historically have different amounts of pineal calcification based upon their historical experiences. It doesn't make one necessarily superior to the other, but what it does do is it can make it more difficult sometimes to see clearly certain kinds of esoteric or spiritual experiences. And so that's another complex subject, but it is connected to historically and in the metaphysical literature with perception of certain kind of spiritual processes being activated. Let's put it that way.
Now, to that, this is just me, to that calcification of the pineal, does diet have anything to do with that? Can it affect it?
Yes, it does. Diet, it has affected it. Lifestyle affects it. And also, it's the kind of situation that just doesn't change overnight.
Right.
The folks with the highest amount of pineal calcification of the pineal gland are cousins and brothers in the northern climates of Europe, simply because of adaptation, sunlight, diet, and so forth. Over thousands of years, you have more and more pineal gland calcification. The ones who have the less, or the Asiatic people, those that have the least amount of pineal gland calcification, are the direct African descendants. But again, we are all Africans, and so it is nothing ultimate about it, but it is nevertheless there.
Right. Okay. And actually, some of the stuff Dr. Bynum was just talking about in Dark Light Consciousness, it's in the first two sections, scattered about. A lot of the stuff he was just breaking down is scattered in them first two sections of the book. So I would recommend people look there for specifically what he was just talking about. All right. And then I think we'll just take one or two more. Is that okay with you, Dr. Bynum? I don't want to hold you.
Yeah, a couple more.
Okay. All right. You let me know, and then you just let me know when it's the last one, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, two more.
Two more. All right. We're going to take two more people. So next one is our Relic Cyrus. What question? When the hold on, let me make sure I'm reading this right. With the Kundalini, when portals open, what should one study or discipline themselves with to have more of an understanding? I have realized that others who were present could not see. I'm not really sure. That question's a little confusing to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is exactly. But I do know that when she begins to become active in you, definitely read. Please read the books, read the literature, not only the New Age stuff, but read some of the classic literature, the translation books on this phenomena, and read it across culturally too. How did it occur in India? How did it occur in the other disciplines we've been talking about tonight? So that you got a broader perspective. Because the broader your perspective of this is, the better you're going to be prepared to deal with the specifics of it as it affects your physical body and mind.
Okay. All right. And this will be the last one. And this is from Rainer Rains. If the subconscious mind is located in the human brain, then what happens when the brain dies?
Well, first of all, I don't accept that premise that it is located in the brain.
I was going to tell you that too, yeah.
It radiates through the brain. Like you have a television or a radio in your house or your apartment, but the material that comes through the radio is not in the radio. The radio, it serves as an amplifier for that.
So does consciousness still exist when you pass on, Dr. Bynum?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay. Makes sense. And when you were talking about the pineal gland earlier, you see a lot of the depictions of it in the center of the forehead, and that's not where it's located either. But I know they show that in illustrations because, you know, the all-seeing eye and things of that nature. But I'm glad you clarified that too, also with the subconscious. All right, that will wrap it up. We'll get Dr. Bynum back. As always, Dr. Bynum, I appreciate you coming by. I appreciate your time. And I appreciate your approach and how you break a lot of this stuff down, because I think, again, I've said this many times before in the past, in my opinion, this to me is needed in these circles of consciousness. There's not a lot of circles of consciousness that really attack it on the level you do. And I'm not just saying that, I really mean that. And that's one thing that I know myself and the listeners here have always been captivated by. And I think Jack put it in, Brother Jack, who was on earlier, put it in simplistic words. You make it simple, but yet you're detailed. It's not really simple, but it is. But again, I appreciate you coming by. And again, I know all your books are on Amazon, but Inner Traditions too, correct? Is where people can go to get your books?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I definitely appreciate your time. I will be in touch, and hopefully next month soon we'll get you back again in a month or so, you know, if your schedule permits, and we'll continue our discussion. I
appreciate it. I hope our folks have found this useful tonight.
I'm sure they did. Thank you, Dr. Bynum.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Night.
All right, people. So we're just going to stay on for just a little bit more, just kind of quick abbreviate. Look, again, this is the book. I'm not going to stay on too much longer, but we're just going to touch on a few things. Again, this is one of the many books, and I know some of you have had it and have studied it. And if you don't have it, phenomenal book. The reason why I like to bring Dr. Bynum on, I just want to make this clear, and I've made this before. He, quote unquote, you know, he deals with metaphysics, the occult. He's not, quote unquote, left-hand path, and I've mentioned that many times before. It has been initiated in left-hand path Dravidian Tantra, which he actually went over to India and was initiated in. He does deal with more of the psychological and the spiritual sciences of it. I wouldn't, again, classify him how we would classify a lot of the stuff that we discuss here on the channel. So we need to be aware of that. But I think his information can bridge anybody's spiritual system, regardless of what it is. And again, he's a well-traveled, well-educated man. And if you read his bio, you know, he is, again, he's a practicing clinical psychologist, works out of UMass. And you can actually pull up some of his lectures on YouTube. He doesn't lecture really anymore. He stopped doing that a few years back. But if, you know, metaphysics and alchemy and working with the Kundalini and all of those aspects is something that, you know, you incorporate in your work. Because remember, on this path, we can incorporate whatever we, you know, choose to incorporate on this path. But I think Dr. Bynum, from a psychological, a scientifical, the medical aspect, which I don't think is addressed, in my opinion, enough in many different conscious circles. And I think the question that Brother Duma had asked was a very good question. A lot of those things we need to educate ourselves on. And again, common sense, sound mind, sound body. But if you really, we talk a lot about shadow work on this channel, dealing with the real self. I like to bring it up with him because he goes a little more scientifical with it. He gets a little more in depth. But as you heard him say several times, you must deal with those shadow aspects of yourself. It's the only way we're going to grow. But now you got a different perspective from it. It's really the same thing, but you got kind of a different viewpoint on it. And he goes into that in the book. Because this book, again, the Dark Light Consciousness, along with a lot of his other books, can be very helpful and beneficial on this path as far as dealing with those systems of spirituality. So again, I think these are important things that we need to take into account, because I don't think sometimes we pay enough of attention to the basics. The question that the person asked about the pineal. I talk about that a lot over the years in videos. Calcification. You heard them. Lifestyle, diet, and the lifestyle. That filters out into the information you take in. You take in incorrect information that's not right. That messes you up. Keeping certain companies, certain circles, everything that you absorb, as far as your lifestyle is concerned. I've been telling people that since day one has an effect on it. And that's very important. And if you go into his book, and I think it's chapter 9, disciplines, setting goals, which I think that's critical. Because remember, this path is not just about, talking about a bunch of heavy, deep topics. You got to have your own personal plan for yourself. What's your plan? What's your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Right? And are you actually mapping these goals out, charting them? Are you striving towards them? Because you can be scatterbrained all over the place. You understand? And doesn't mean you can't, multitask into a multitude of things, because that's a skill too. But sometimes people have the ability to multitask, but they can't absorb what it is that they're doing simultaneously. So the section in here is setting goals, mapping what you're trying to accomplish out. I think some of these basic steps, again, I think we overlook them. I think we don't pay attention to enough of them, because if you use some of these methodologies, I think it helps keep people focused. It'll help you get better results, as far as whatever you're trying to carry out. The problem is sometimes we bypass, to me, the basic essentials, and we go to what I like to call Spookville. I know everybody wants to astral travel and levitate and heal and all that shit, but you got to get the basic stuff down packed first. That's just a reality. All right. That's just a reality. But anyway, we'll get them back. Anyway. Yeah, we will get him back. I'm going to cut this a little early tonight. Get some other stuff done. Just a couple quick announcements, couple reminders, which I didn't get to in the beginning of the show. Next Tuesday, I'll be talking about Lilith, the divine demonic goddess. We're going to go deeper and kind of wrap up this whole dealing with the Klipothic tree and working with the demonic realm. And that's going to be the icing on the cake. So that's going to be Tuesday's show. We'll be back on the air next Thursday. We've got Val Cadman will be on the show. All right. He'll be here next Thursday night live. I know a lot of you are familiar with Val Cadman. Have your questions ready. He's always a very interesting dude to get on here. He too, in my opinion, like Dr. Bynum, has his own skill. He makes the information really simple. And if you guys are familiar with his work, now his last book that just came out, Ghosts, Demons, and the Citra Aqua, dealing with that, a little more complex. He got a little more technical on that one. And I'm going through it and I'm getting a lot out of it. And so, some from that book has inspired me to do the recent series that I'm doing now. Actually, a lot of that inspiration came from when that book came out, when he sent it to me. But as you know, he has a skill too of making things very simplified. He puts rituals and work in there that's very easy for the occultist to do. It don't matter if you're a beginner. It doesn't matter if you're a seasoned vet. I think he has that talent, and I've always been a person less is more. I don't think, in my opinion, sometimes things don't. I think we make them more complex than they need to be. That's just me. But everybody's different, and I think Val Cadman has that skill. So he'll be here next Thursday night, 8:00. We'll be talking about, I'm not even sure what we're going to be talking about, but I'll get a hold of him from now until Thursday. So we'll talk about something. I know he's going to want to continue some of the discussion on the new book, because there was a lot of things we didn't get to in there. I was thinking about maybe going over the aspects of the adversary that he has in the book. He breaks them down and maybe go through that, but we'll see. So he'll be here next Thursday, and then next Friday night, the 26th, we will have our group working here in South Florida, in the Fort Lauderdale area. That will begin 8 o'clock. The cutoff to attend that will be next Wednesday. So if you're still interested in coming to the Luciferian Rite of Azazel, that'll be Friday night, April 26th, 8 p.m. Feel free to email me for an invite. And again, the cutoff to request an invite for that ritual will be Wednesday, April 24th. Online classes, I know people keep emailing me the next session. We are in the midst of the last few for this session. I will be looking to start the next one, as I said, late summer, early fall. I'll take a break after this is over in a few weeks. I'd like to kind of take a break in between. I'll re-kick them up. We will be doing some individual sessions on a Friday evening. I'll have more information coming with that next month in May. So you could email. I know people have emailed about, when can I get into the next online class session. I'll have exact dates probably by the middle of next month, the end of next month. So just keep a lookout for that. If you need to also contact me or are interested in a spiritual reading or a consultation, you see the email. It's in the description box here. That is khnum19@gmail.com. Feel free to hit me up. Other than that, appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate everybody's input. Good questions. And again, I will get with Dr. Bynum and see if we can get him back here sometime next month, towards the end of next month. All right. Everybody have a good one. Peace. And we will see everybody on Tuesday.